he bought the house for £240,000. 22 years later, he sold it for $480,000. He had doubled his money. Except he had not. The total he had spent on that house across 22 years of ownership was not £240,000. It was closer to $560,000. When the sale completed and the final number settled, the house had not returned him a profit. It had returned him a loss of approximately £80,000 on a transaction he had spent 2 decades describing to anyone who asked as the best financial decision he ever made. He did not know this. Nobody had ever asked him to calculate it. Nobody in the process of buying the house, selling the house, advising on the house, or congratulating him on the house had ever suggested he might want to add up what the house had actually cost him and compare that total to what it returned. The number that appears when you sell a house feels like a profit because it is larger than the number you paid. The number that does not appear anywhere is the sum of everything you spent between those 2 transactions: mortgage interest, property taxes, maintenance, insurance, the boiler that failed in year 7, the roof in year 14, the kitchen that needed replacing before the sale would go through, the estate agent fees and the solicitor fees and the stamp duty paid on the way in. None of those numbers appear on the same document as the sale price, which is why the profit feels real and the loss remains invisible. This video is about the most widely held financial belief in the English-speaking world: the belief that your home is your best investment. By the end of it, you will have a single calculation that shows you what your home is actually returning you as an investment, in real numbers, compared to what the same money would have returned you in a broad market index fund across the same period. The calculation takes 10 minutes. Most people who run it are surprised by what they find. In the last video on this channel, we looked at the true cost test, the principle that the real price of anything is not the number presented to you at the point of sale, but the total you arrive at when you multiply out and add up what the purchase actually costs across its full life. The same principle applies here. The house is the largest purchase most people ever make. It is also the one whose true cost is most consistently never calculated. He was 29 years old when he bought it. He had been renting for 6 years by then, in the way that people rent in their 20s in expensive cities, moving when leases ended, adjusting to new flat mates, making temporary versions of permanent lives. He was tired of it. Not financially tired, though the rent was not cheap. Psychologically tired. The tiredness that comes from living in a place that is not entirely yours, where you cannot paint a wall without asking permission, and cannot plan more than 12 months in advance without someone else's decision overriding yours. He wanted to own something. That is a completely understandable human desire, and this video is not going to tell you it is wrong. The desire to own a home is not a financial mistake. The mistake is something more specific than that. The mistake is what happens when the desire to own a home becomes fused with the belief that owning a home is investing, so completely and so early that it stops being examined as a belief at all, and becomes the foundation that every subsequent financial decision is built on. His parents owned their home. His parents' parents had owned their home. Every piece of financial advice he had ever absorbed from the people who raised him, from the culture he moved through, from the colleagues he worked alongside pointed in the same direction. Get on the ladder. The sooner the better. The house always goes up. Property is the one thing they are not making more of. He believed all of it. Not because he was credulous, because the evidence available to him supported it. His parents' house had increased in value. His colleagues who had bought earlier were sitting on paper gains. The property supplements in the weekend papers ran the same story every quarter with slightly different numbers and the same conclusion: buy, hold, the house does the work. What none of that evidence included was the calculation. The actual calculation. The one that subtracts everything spent from everything returned and produces the real annualized investment return of the property as a financial asset. When an economist named Robert Shiller ran that calculation across 100 years of U.S. housing data, from 1915 to 2015, the result was not what most homeowners expected to find. After adjusting for inflation, U.S. home prices had increased by approximately 0.6% per year on average across that entire century. 0.6%. Not 6%. Not the 7% this channel has used consistently as the long-run real return of a broad market index fund. 0.6%. For a century of data, across the country most associated globally with the belief that property is the path to wealth. Shiller was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in part for this and related work. His findings were not fringe. They were not contested by serious researchers. They were simply never communicated to the people making the largest financial decision of their lives at the kitchen table with a mortgage application in front of them. He stretched to buy the house. Not irresponsibly. He did not borrow more than the bank would lend. He did not ignore the affordability calculations his mortgage advisor ran with him across 2 appointments. He stretched in the way that most first-time buyers stretch, which is to say he bought at the top of what the numbers permitted rather than the middle, because the house at the top of what the numbers permitted was in the right area, had the right feel, was the kind of place you could imagine your life going rather than just being stored in. The monthly mortgage payment was £1,140. After the mortgage payment, the council tax, the building's insurance, and the service charge on the leasehold property, his fixed monthly housing costs were £1,380. He had nothing left for investing. Not as a permanent state, as a temporary one, he told himself. Once the mortgage came down, once he got his next pay rise, once things settled into the shape they would eventually settle into. The temporary state lasted 11 years. This is the second cost of the belief that the house is the investment. Not just the return the house delivers compared to what the market would have delivered. The absence of everything else. The pension contributions that never reached their potential because the mortgage came first. The ISA that sat unfunded for a decade because the house was the plan and the plan felt solid. He was not making a bad decision by buying a house. He was making an incomplete calculation by treating the house as a substitute for every other financial decision, rather than as one part of a broader picture. The house felt like investing because money was going somewhere tangible, somewhere he could stand in, somewhere that had a door with his name on the mortgage for it. An index fund does not have a door. An index fund does not have the particular satisfaction of ownership that makes financial commitment feel like something more than a number on a screen. The feeling of investing and the mathematics of investing are not the same thing. They can feel identical from the inside, while pointing in entirely different directions. Let me show you the numbers he never ran. He purchased at £240,000. Mortgage at a rate we will assume at 5.5% over 25 years, which is within the documented range of UK mortgage rates across the period he was buying. This assumption is stated clearly because the calculation changes with the rate, and you should run it with your own numbers. Total mortgage interest paid over 25 years at that rate on that purchase price, approximately £190,000. Property maintenance averaged across the ownership period at 1% of property value annually, which is a conservative and widely used assumption for a property of this type in this price range. Approximately £56,000 over 22 years. Council tax, buildings insurance and service charge across 22 years, approximately £62,000. Stamp duty on purchase, estate agent fees on sale, solicitor fees on both transactions, approximately £22,000. Total spent on the house across the full ownership period, approximately £570,000. Sale price, £480,000. The house that felt like it doubled his money cost him approximately £90,000 more than it returned. He did not know this. He had never been asked to calculate it. The estate agent who sold it told him he had done very well. His colleagues agreed. His parents were proud. The numbers on the surface of the transaction told one story. The numbers beneath the surface of the transaction told another one entirely. The calculation above is the first cost. The second cost is harder to look at directly because it requires asking not just what the house returned, but what the same money would have returned in a different vehicle across the same period. This is the opportunity cost, the return that was not earned because the capital was committed somewhere else. It is the most uncomfortable number in this video because it is the number that cannot be recovered. The house is sold. The 22 years are spent. The question of what might have been is genuinely painful to run if you have spent 2 decades telling yourself and everyone around you that the house was the plan. But the discomfort of looking at it is considerably smaller than the cost of not understanding it before the next decision is made. His deposit was £48,000. That money went into the house on the day he bought it. It did not go into a broad market index fund. The question is what £48,000 in a broad market index fund, returning 7% annually on average, would have become over 22 years. The answer is approximately £218,000. £218,000 from the deposit alone. Then there is the monthly mortgage payment, £1,140 a month for 25 years. Some of that payment is interest, which is a cost with no return. Some of it is principal repayment, which is equity being built. This is the part of the homeownership calculation that is genuinely complicated, and it is worth being precise about it. In the early years of a repayment mortgage, the vast majority of each monthly payment is interest. On a 25-year mortgage at 5.5%, in year 1, approximately 80% of each monthly payment is interest. By year 25, the proportion has flipped, but by year 10, the homeowner has paid approximately £115,000 in mortgage payments and reduced the principal by approximately £35,000. The interest portion of the mortgage payment, the money that builds no equity and generates no return, is the cost of using borrowed money to own an asset. That cost, redirected into a broad index fund over the same period, would have compounded into something significant. But the more important question is the one that most people in his position never ask. What if instead of stretching to the top of what the bank would lend, he had bought at the middle of what the bank would lend, put the deposit into a combination of property and investment account, and kept the monthly payment low enough that investing alongside the mortgage was possible from the beginning, rather than deferred for 11 years. This is not a question about whether to buy a house. It is a question about whether to treat the house as the entirety of the financial plan or as one component of it. Those are very different decisions, and they produce very different outcomes. There are 2 versions of the next 20 years. In the first version, the belief holds. The house is the investment. The mortgage is paid faithfully every month. The property rises in value because over long periods in most markets it does rise in nominal terms even when the real return after costs is modest. He arrives at 60 with a paid-off house, a smaller pension than he intended, and the particular satisfaction of owning something outright that he has been paying for across 3 decades. He is not in poverty. He is not the cautionary tale. He is the person who built one asset at the cost of building others, who put all the weight on one leg of a financial structure that needed 2, who spent 22 years believing the house was doing more than it was because nobody ever asked him to run the calculation, and the calculation, had he run it, would have told him something he was not ready to hear at 29 when the mortgage application was in front of him, and the house was the right house, and buying felt like the beginning of the real part of his life. In the second version, he buys the house. Not the one at the top of what the bank would lend. The one in the middle, £200,000 instead of 240. The mortgage payment lower by approximately £220 a month. That £220 invested consistently in a broad index fund from the month he moves in becomes something different from nothing. £220 a month invested at 7% average annual return over 22 years becomes approximately £141,000. £141,000. From the difference between the house he bought and the house one step below it on the list. He still owns a house. He still builds equity. He still has the door with his name on the mortgage for it. He also has £141,000 in an investment account that has been running quietly in the background for 22 years while he was living his life. The house is not the enemy in this story. The belief that the house is the entirety of the plan is the enemy. I want to tell you about someone I knew well enough to watch this pattern from the inside. She was 33 when she bought, sensible woman, careful with money in every other area of her life. She had saved the deposit over 4 years, which was not easy and which she was rightly proud of. She bought a good house in a good area at a price that the numbers permitted and her instincts approved of. For the next 12 years, she paid the mortgage and maintained the property and watched the estimated value on property websites go up and felt, each time it went up, that something was working, that the plan was proceeding. She did not invest anything else during those 12 years, not because she was reckless, because the mortgage was the investment and the investment felt like it was going well, and splitting attention felt like it would dilute the result. When she ran the true ownership cost calculation for the first time, at 45, it was not because she was worried. It was because a friend had mentioned it and she was curious. The curiosity lasted about 40 minutes, after which she sat with a piece of paper covered in numbers and understood, for the first time, that the story she had been telling herself about the house was not the story the numbers told. What she felt was not regret exactly. It was something more useful than regret. It was the specific clarity of someone who has finally looked at a thing directly and can now make decisions about what comes next from a position of knowing rather than assuming. She started an investment account the following month, 12 years later than she might have. But the morning after the calculation, rather than the morning of her 65th birthday, when it would have been too late to matter. Here is the framework. The true ownership cost calculation. 4 numbers, 10 minutes, one output that tells you what your home is actually returning you as an investment. Number 1. Total mortgage interest paid across the full term, not the monthly payment, the interest component only. Your mortgage provider can give you this figure. It is also calculable on any mortgage calculator by subtracting the original loan amount from the total amount repaid. Number 2. Total maintenance and repair costs across your ownership period. If you do not have records, use 1% of the original purchase price per year as the assumption. State it as an assumption. It is conservative. For older properties, it may be significantly higher. Number 3. All other ownership costs, property taxes or council tax across the full period, buildings insurance, any service charges, ground rent, or management fees, transaction costs on both the purchase and the eventual sale. These are real money that left your account in connection with this property. Add those 3 numbers together. Add the original purchase price. That total is what the property has cost you. Number 4. The current market value of the property, or the sale price if you have already sold. Subtract your total cost from the current value. That difference is your actual gain or loss on the property as an investment. Then divide that gain by the number of years you have owned it to find the approximate annual return in nominal terms. To find the real return, subtract the average annual inflation rate across your ownership period. What you will find in most cases is a real annual return significantly below what a broad market index fund delivered across the same period. What you may also find, in some cases in some markets, is that the property has genuinely outperformed the index. That happens. Property in certain London postcodes across certain decades has returned more than the market. Property in certain US cities across certain periods has done the same. The point of the calculation is not to reach a predetermined conclusion. The point is to replace an assumption with an actual number so that the next decision can be made from knowledge rather than feeling. This is the framework. The true ownership cost calculation is one piece of a larger system. Understanding the real return on your biggest asset is the foundation. The complete system connects that return to your investment strategy, your retirement timeline, and the decisions about how much of your net worth should be concentrated in a single illiquid asset versus distributed across a broader portfolio. But start here. Because you cannot make those larger decisions honestly if you are working from a number that has never been calculated. There is a version of this conversation that most homeowners find uncomfortable, and it is worth addressing directly before we close. The house is not just a financial asset. It is a home. It is the school catchment area. It is the stability that allowed the children to grow up in one place. It is the safety of knowing the landlord cannot end your tenancy when the lease expires. It is the freedom to paint the walls and plant the garden and make the space into the particular version of a life you wanted to live in. These things have value that does not appear in any calculation. They are real and they matter. This video is not an argument against owning a home. It is an argument against the specific and very costly belief that owning a home is a substitute for investing, rather than something that exists alongside investing as a separate decision, serving a separate purpose. Buy the house because you want the home. Value it for what a home provides. And then, separately, build the financial future that a home alone will not build for you, because the evidence of a century of data from the world's largest housing market says that it will not, regardless of how the number on the sale day makes it feel. He sold the house for £480,000 and felt wealthy for approximately 3 weeks. Then the solicitor's final statement arrived. The estate agent's commission, the capital gains consideration, the cost of the place he was moving to, the gap between the story he had been telling himself for 22 years and the reality that the numbers produced when finally assembled in the same document. He was not ruined. He was not in difficulty. He was fine in the way that people who have worked hard and paid their obligations and done the reasonable things are fine. He was also 61 years old with a smaller investment portfolio than someone with his income across 22 working years should have had. And the reason for the gap was not that he had failed to save or invest. The reason was that he had saved and invested in a single asset that he had never once measured against an alternative, because measuring it had not felt necessary when the belief that it was working felt so completely solid. The belief is not the calculation. The calculation is 10 minutes and a piece of paper. The next video on this channel examines a different kind of invisible cost, not the return you thought you were getting, the protection you thought you were building, the emergency fund that most people intend to have and almost nobody actually builds, and the specific, calculable cost of the moment when you need it and it is not there. If you ran the true ownership cost calculation on your home tonight, what would the number at the bottom of the page tell you? Not what you think it would tell you. What the actual numbers would say. Most people who have never run it are more surprised than they expect to be. Till the next video, signing off, David Hangrove. Hope you like the content. Comment down your thoughts or experiences.